Understood, Sarah replied. We appreciate your cooperation, Colonel. Cooperation, Petrov said the word like it tasted bad. Yes, that is what we are calling it. Come. The files are this way. He led them down a corridor lined with portraits of Soviet leaders. Sarah noticed that the more recent additions looked uncomfortable, as if the subjects knew their pictures wouldn't hang there for long. The archive room was smaller than she expected, just a converted office with filing cabinets lining 2 walls. A single table sat in the center with 9 folders arranged in a neat row. Each folder had a name written on it in Cyrillic. These are the complete investigative files, Petrov said, or as complete as they were allowed to be. Much was destroyed. Much was never written down in the first place. The lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, was ordered to conclude the case quickly and quietly. He did as he was told. He had family. You understand. Torres picked up one of the folders. Is Ivanov still alive? Can we talk to him? He died in 1981. Heart attack. Though some say it was not so natural. Petrov's expression didn't change. His last words to his daughter were, I should have told the truth. Make of that what you will. Sarah opened the folder labeled Igor Dyatlov. Inside were autopsy reports, photographs, personal effects inventory, witness statements from the search party. The bureaucratic language couldn't hide the horror of what had been found. Subject exhibits extensive internal trauma, inconsistent with external injuries. Cause of death, compelling natural force. There was that phrase again. Compelling natural force. It appeared in every autopsy report, like a rubber stamp of intentional ignorance. What does that mean? Sarah asked. Compelling natural force. What were they actually saying? Petrov was quiet for a moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, almost gentle. It means they could not write what they really believed. It means the doctors looked at these bodies and saw things that should not be possible. It means the investigators who found the tent, who followed the footprints in the snow, who saw where these people died, they could not explain it in words that would be acceptable to Moscow. So they used a phrase that meant nothing and everything at the same time. Chen was examining a map of the area. The footprints. The reports say they found footprints leading away from the tent, but they were strange. Uneven spacing, different depths, like the hikers were running, but also stumbling. Disoriented. Fleeing, Petrov corrected. They were fleeing. And before you ask from what? No. There were no animal tracks, no evidence of an avalanche, no signs of an attack by humans, just 9 experienced hikers cutting their way out of their tent and running into the night to freeze to death, running from something they saw. Sarah felt her heart rate pick up. The photographs. Director Hayes said there were photographs. Petrov nodded slowly. He walked to one of the filing cabinets and removed a locked metal box. From his pocket, he produced a key and opened it. Inside were 5 envelopes, each one marked with a camera number and film roll number. These have not been seen by Western eyes. Ever. I am authorized to show them to you because my superiors believe Americans are too practical to be affected. They think your lack of belief in anything beyond the material world will protect you. Protect us from what? Torres asked. From seeing what is really there. Petrov placed the first envelope on the table. His hand hovered over it for a moment, then withdrew. Before I show you, understand something. Of the 26 people involved in the original investigation, 8 are dead, 5 from suicide, 3 from accidents that were probably not accidents. The rest refused to speak about what they saw. Ivanov's daughter told me her father had nightmares until the day he died. Always the same dream. He is standing in the snow, and something is looking at him, and he cannot look away, and his body is forgetting how to breathe. Sarah reached for the envelope. "Show us." Petrov slid the photographs out slowly, as if giving them one last chance to change their minds. There were 8 photos in total, black and white, slightly overexposed from the snow glare. The first 7 showed exactly what you would expect from a hiking expedition. Smiling bees around a campfire, someone setting up a tent. Trees heavy with snow, mountains in the distance. The 8th photograph was different. It showed the same mountain landscape, the same trees, the same snow. But in the distance, barely visible against the white background, there was something else. A shape, tall and indistinct, like a figure standing on a ridge about half a mile away. At first, Sarah thought it might be one of the hikers, separated from the group. But the scale was wrong. If that was a person, they would have to be at least 10 or 12 feet tall. And there was something about the shape itself that didn't look quite right. It was humanoid, yes, but the proportions were off in a way she couldn't immediately identify. This was from Igor Dyatlov's camera, Petrov said quietly. Roll number 2, exposure 18. He took it in approximately 6 hours before the group set up their final camp. Now look at this one. He placed another photograph on the table. This one was from a different angle, taken from higher up on the slope. The same distant figure, but clearer now. And Sarah could see what made it wrong. The head was too large, the arms too long, and it had no face. Just a smooth, blank surface where a face should be. This is from Zina Kolmogoreva's camera. Different angle, different time of day based on the shadows. 3 hours after Dyatlov's photo. The group is moving up the mountain. So is the figure. It is following them. Torres picked up the photo, held it closer to his face. It could be a trick of the light, snow blindness, overexposure. That is what the Soviet scientists said at first. Then they analyzed the negatives. No tampering. No exposure problems. This is what the cameras captured. Petrov placed 3 more photographs on the table in sequence. Each one showed the figure closer than the last. These are from the final roll of film found in Semyon Zolotaryov's camera. The last 3 exposures before the group reached their campsite. In the final photograph, the figure was less than 100 yards away, and it was facing the camera. That blank, featureless face turned directly toward whoever was taking the picture. Sarah felt something shift in her chest. A tightness, an instinctive recoil that had nothing to do with logic or reason. Her brain was screaming at her that this was wrong, that she shouldn't be looking at this, that some part of her hindbrain recognized a threat her conscious mind couldn't process. What is it? Chen's voice was barely a whisper. We do not know. We have never known, but we know what it does. Petrov gathered the photographs and returned them to the envelope with careful, deliberate movements. It makes you see it, And when you see it, truly see it, your body cannot handle the fear. The medical term is acute stress cardiomyopathy. The heart muscle weakens from adrenaline overload. But that is just the mechanism. The cause is something else. The cause is looking at something human beings were never meant to look at. That's impossible, Torres said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Then explain why 9 healthy young people fled into the night. Explain why some of them had so much adrenaline in their systems that it burned through their muscle tissue. Explain why 3 of them had burst blood vessels in their eyes, in their brains, from the blood pressure spike. Explain the tongue. Sarah looked up. What about the tongue? Lyudmila Dubinina, 21 years old, strong, athletic. They found her in the creek bed, face down in the water. The autopsy showed she had been alive when she went into the water. But here is the strange part. Her tongue was not cut out. It was not bitten off. The coroner said it appeared to have been removed by some kind of extreme pressure or suction, like something had pulled it out from the root. And do you know what the last photograph on her camera showed? He placed one final photo on the table. It was blurry, badly framed, as if taken by someone running or falling. But Sarah could make out what it showed. The figure, right in front of the camera, close enough to touch. That blank face filling the entire frame. She saw it, Petrov said softly. She looked directly at it, and the fear was so intense that she bit through her own tongue trying to scream. The room was very quiet. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, could feel her hands starting to tremble. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to think logically. Why are you showing us this? Why bring us here if it's so dangerous? Petrov's expression softened slightly. For the first time since they had met him, he looked almost human, almost sympathetic. Because for 30 years, we have lived with this knowledge alone. Because our scientists have studied this phenomenon and made no progress. Because whatever that thing is, it is still there. We have restricted the area. We have forbidden travel. We have done everything we can to contain it. But Dyatlov Pass is not the only place it has been seen. There have been other incidents, other deaths, always the same pattern. People see something. They flee in terror. They die from the fear itself. He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. You Americans, you pride yourselves on your rationality, on your science, on believing only what can be proven. So prove it. Go to the pass. Take your equipment. Take your cameras. Find this thing if you can. Look at it with your skeptical Western eyes. And maybe, just maybe, you will not die. Sarah met his gaze. And if we do see it, if we react the same way the Dyatlov group did, then at least we will know it is not out of Soviet weakness, that it affects all humans the same way. That will be useful information, even if you do not survive to report it personally. His Torres laughed, but it sounded forced. That's not much comfort, Colonel. No, Petrov agreed. It is not. but it is all I can offer. Tomorrow morning, a helicopter will take you to Ivdel. From there, you will ski to the pass. It will take 2 days. You will have camping equipment, communication gear, and medical supplies. You will also have dosimeters to check for radiation, since some of the original victims showed contamination. Any questions? Sarah had 1,000 questions. But she asked the only one that really mattered. Do you think we'll survive this? Petrov was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small Orthodox icon, the kind Russian grandmothers carried for protection. He placed it on the table. My mother gave this to me when I joined the KGB. She said it would protect me from evil. I have carried it for 36 years. I have survived things that should have killed me. Maybe it works. Maybe it is just superstition. But I think you should have it more than I do. Sarah picked up the icon. It showed Saint Michael, the archangel, sword raised, standing over a fallen demon. The paint was worn from years of being carried, but the image was still clear. "Thank you," she said. Petrov nodded. "Do not thank me yet. Thank me if you come back alive. Now go, rest. Tomorrow you begin a journey that 30 years ago cost 9 people their lives. Let us hope your American skepticism is armor enough." That night, Sarah lay awake in her hotel room, staring at the ceiling. The icon sat on the nightstand, catching the light from the street outside. She kept thinking about those photographs, about that blank face staring into the camera, about 9 people fleeing into the night, so terrified that they forgot about the cold, forgot about survival, forgot about everything except getting away. What could do that to a person? What could inspire that level of fear? Her phone rang. It was Torres, room-to-room call. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "No. You? Keep thinking about what Petrov said. About the tongue. About the blood pressure spikes. Sarah, I've seen combat casualties. I've seen people die afraid. But this is different. This is something else." "I know. Are we really going to do this? Ski out to that pass and try to find this thing?" Sarah thought about her training, about the oath she had taken when she joined the CIA, about the mission briefing and the classified files and the weight of 30 years of unanswered questions. "Yes," she said. "We're going to do this." Okay, I'll see you in the morning." After he hung up, Sarah picked up the icon and held it in her hand. Saint Michael, protector against evil. She wasn't religious, hadn't been since childhood. But looking at that worn painting, she found herself wishing she believed. Wishing there was something out there that could protect her from whatever waited in the mountains. She set the icon back down and finally fell into a restless sleep. She dreamed of snow and blank faces and running through the dark with something behind her that she couldn't see but knew was there. Always there, watching with eyes that weren't eyes, and seeing with a sight that turned blood to ice and thoughts to screaming static. When she woke, it was dawn. The helicopter would be waiting. It was time to go to Dyatlov Pass. The helicopter was a Mi-8, a workhorse of Soviet aviation that looked like it had been flying since the 1960s. The interior smelled of jet fuel and old metal. Sarah strapped herself into the uncomfortable canvas seat and watched as their gear was loaded. Skis, camping equipment, medical supplies, communication equipment, and several cases of camera gear that Torres had insisted on bringing. If we're going to photograph this thing, we need to replicate the conditions as closely as possible, he had explained that morning over breakfast. Same type of cameras, same film stock, same everything. If there's something about the photographic process itself that makes this entity visible, we need to control for all variables. Colonel Petrov had arranged for them to have 3 cameras identical to the ones used by the Dyatlov group. Zorky 4 rangefinders, standard Soviet equipment from the era. Chen had spent an hour that morning learning how to load the film properly. The pilot, a grizzled man who introduced himself only as Mikhail, barely glanced at them as they boarded. He had the look of someone who had seen too much and decided the only way to survive was to see as little as possible. "Ivdel, in 1 hour," he said in heavily accented English. "Then you are on your own." The helicopter lifted off, and Moscow fell away beneath them. Sarah watched the city give way to industrial towns, then forests, then the vast emptiness of the Ural wilderness. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Mountains rose like broken teeth against the gray sky. Rivers wound through valleys that looked like they had never seen human footprints. "How far north are we going?" Chen asked, raising his voice over the engine noise. "Far enough that civilization is just a memory," Torres replied. He was checking his GPS unit, marking waypoints on a paper map as backup. Dyatlov Pass is about 60 degrees north latitude. That's the same as Anchorage, Alaska. But the Urals don't have the Pacific currents to moderate the temperature. It gets cold here in a way that Americans don't really understand. Sarah pulled her coat tighter. Even inside the helicopter, she could feel the chill. They had been issued Soviet military cold weather gear, the same kind used by troops stationed in Siberia. It was heavy and smelled like mothballs, but Petrov had assured them it would keep them alive if they used it properly. If, such a small word for such a big question. An hour later, they touched down in Ivdel. It wasn't much of a town. A collection of squat concrete buildings, mining equipment rusting in yards, and people who looked at the helicopter like it was bringing nothing but trouble. A few old women in headscarves watched from doorways. None of them waved. "Friendly place," Torres muttered. A man approached as they unloaded their gear. He was in his 60s, wearing a thick fur coat and a hat with ear flaps. His face was weathered like old leather. "You are the Americans," he said, not a question. "I am Yuri. I will guide you to the pass." "Colonel Petrov arranged this?" Sarah asked. "Colonel Petrov ordered it. There is a difference." Yuri began sorting through their equipment with practiced efficiency. "You ski?" "Yes." "Good. It is 40 kilometers. 2 days, if weather holds. 3, if it does not. I have done this journey 12 times. I do not wish to do it a 13th time, but Colonel makes it clear here I have no choice." "You've been to the pass before?" Chen asked. Yuri's expression hardened. "I was one of the searchers in 1959. I was 21 years old. I found Zina Kolmogorova. She was frozen in the snow, crawling back toward the tent. Whatever she was running from, she decided at the end it was better to face the cold. I have wondered for 30 years what could be worse than freezing to death." He picked up one of the camera cases and looked at Torres. "You bring cameras. Same kind they had. This is not coincidence, yes? We want to document our investigation thoroughly, Torres said carefully. Document. Yuri almost smiled, but not quite. That is good word. Very American. Very scientific. We will see if you still want to document things when you see what they saw. They set out within the hour. The first day of skiing was hard but not impossible. The terrain was relatively flat, following old logging roads and deer paths through the forest. Yuri set a steady pace, stopping every few hours to check their condition and make them drink water even when they weren't thirsty. Dehydration kills faster than cold in winter, he explained. Your body uses so much energy staying warm, you do not feel the thirst. But your blood thickens, your thinking slows. Then you make mistakes. Mistakes here kill you. As they traveled, Sarah found herself studying the landscape. It was so empty, so vast. Back home in Virginia, you were never more than a few miles from a town or a road. But here, human presence felt like an intrusion. Like the land tolerated visitors, but never welcomed them. That night, they camped in a clearing beside a half-frozen stream. Yuri showed them how to set up the tent properly, how to secure it against the wind that rose after sunset. They ate a simple meal of dried meat and black bread, washed down with tea from a thermos that somehow stayed hot despite the cold. Tell us about the search, Sarah said. In 1959, what did you find? Yuri was quiet for a long time, staring into the small camp stove they were using for warmth. Finally, he spoke. We found the tent first. February 26th. More than 3 weeks after they died. It was still standing, partially collapsed from snow. But the way it was cut, from the inside, with such force. They used knives, scissors, whatever they had. They destroyed their only shelter to escape it. That is what I remember most. Not the fear of what was outside, the fear of staying inside one more second. What do you think they saw? Chen asked. I think they saw death. Not the death that comes from cold or hunger or injury, the death that looks at you. The death that knows your name. The death that is patient and inevitable, and has been waiting for you specifically since the moment you were born. Torres shifted uncomfortably. That's pretty poetic for a mining town guide. I was student before I was guide. Philosophy and literature at Ural State University. Then came the search. Then came what I saw. Then came the drinking and the nightmares and the understanding that some questions do not have answers humans can survive knowing. So I became guide instead, safer to lead hunters into forest than to lead myself into those thoughts. He stood abruptly. Sleep now. Tomorrow is harder. Tomorrow we climb. Sarah lay in her sleeping bag that night, listening to the wind in the trees and the occasional crack of ice on the stream. Through the tent fabric, she could see stars. So many stars, uncountable, each one a sun surrounded by planets that might have their own people looking up at their own night skies and wondering if they were alone. Were they alone? Or were there things out there, things that existed in the spaces between what humans could perceive and what drove them mad to perceive? She thought about the photographs, that blank face, those wrong proportions, the way her body had reacted to just looking at an image, a second-hand glimpse of something that had been captured on film 30 years ago. What would happen when she saw it in person? If she saw it in person. When she finally slept, she dreamed of running through snow, of a tent cut open behind her, of 9 people fleeing in different directions, because the only thing worse than dying alone was dying together while that thing watched. The second day was harder. The terrain became steep, the snow deeper. They left the trees behind and entered the alpine zone, where only low shrubs and exposed rock broke up the white landscape. The wind picked up, howling across the ridgeline like something alive and angry. Yuri stopped frequently to check the GPS and compare it to his paper map. We are close now. Another 2 hours to where they made their camp. The place where it happened. How do you know exactly where? Sarah asked. Because I can feel it. The wrongness. You will feel it too, soon enough. And she did. About an hour later, Sarah became aware of a growing sense of unease. It wasn't anything she could point to, specifically. The landscape looked the same. The weather hadn't changed. But something felt off, like reality was slightly out of focus. Anyone else feel that? Torres asked, his voice tight. Yes, Chen said immediately. Like someone's watching us. Not someone, Yuri said. Something. We are entering its territory now. The Mansi people who live in these mountains, they have always avoided this area. They call it Kholat Shakal, the mountain of the dead. Not because people die here, though they do. Because death lives here. Death in a form that has no name in any human language. They crested a ridge, and there it was. A snow-covered slope, maybe 30 degrees steep, with a clear area where a tent could be pitched. Below, the tree line. Above, exposed rock and ice. This is it, Yuri said. This is where they camped, where they cut their way out and ran into the night. Sarah looked around slowly. It seemed so ordinary. Just another mountain slope, just another patch of snow. But that feeling of wrongness was stronger now, like the air itself was holding its breath. We should set up camp, Torres said. We're losing daylight. They worked quickly and efficiently, pitching their tent in almost the exact spot where the Dyatlov group had pitched theirs. Sarah tried not to think about how those 9 people had spent their last evening doing the same thing. Setting up camp, cooking dinner, maybe joking about the cold, or discussing the route for the next day. Normal things, human things, not knowing they had hours left to live. As the sun set, the temperature dropped fast. Yuri built a camp stove fire and heated more tea. They ate in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Sarah found herself checking the tent entrance compulsively, making sure the zipper was fully closed, making sure nothing could get in, or maybe making sure they could get out quickly. Tonight, we take watches, Yuri announced. 2-hour shifts. 4 of us. So everyone gets 6 hours sleep total. I take first watch. What are we watching for? Chen asked. You will know when you see it. Or rather, when you feel it. The fear comes first, before the sight. Your body knows before your mind does. Sarah took the second watch, from 10 p.m. to midnight. She sat near the tent entrance with a flashlight and one of the Zorky cameras. The night was clear, the moon 3/4 full, and bright enough to cast shadows on the snow. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it was terrifying. Every sound made her jump. The wind shifting snow, something creaking in the cold, the distant sound of ice cracking on a frozen stream. Her rational mind knew these were normal sounds, natural sounds, but some deeper part of her brain insisted that each sound was a footstep, a breath, a presence drawing closer. She checked her watch. 11:15. 45 minutes left. She could do this. That's when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Not wind. Not ice. Not any animal she knew. It was more like a vibration. So low it was almost inaudible. But she felt it in her chest, in her bones. A frequency that resonated with something primal in her nervous system. Sarah's hands started to shake. Her heart rate spiked. Her breathing became shallow and rapid. The flashlight beam wobbled as she swept it across the snow, looking for the source of the sound. Nothing, just empty landscape and moon shadows. But the feeling was growing stronger. The certainty that something was out there. Something was watching her. She fumbled for the camera with numb fingers. Torres had loaded it with fresh film that morning and shown her how to use the manual focus. She raised it to her eye and pointed it in the direction where the feeling seemed strongest. Through the viewfinder, the world looked flat and colorless. Shadows became pools of black. The snow became fields of white. And there, at the edge of where the moonlight reached, something moved. Sarah's breath caught. She adjusted the focus ring, trying to see it more clearly. It was tall, definitely taller than any human, and it was standing perfectly still, about 200 yards away, at the tree line, just standing, watching. She pressed the shutter. The click sounded impossibly loud in the cold air. She advanced the film manually and took another shot, then another. Her hands were shaking so badly she wasn't sure if any of them would be in focus, but she kept shooting. The figure didn't move, but Sarah became aware of a growing pressure in her head, like someone was pushing on her temples from the inside. Her vision started to blur at the edges. Her heart was hammering now, so hard it hurt. This was it. This was the fear response Petrov had described. Her body preparing for a threat it couldn't understand or fight. The adrenaline dumping into her bloodstream, the blood pressure spiking, the primitive part of her brain screaming, "Run! Run! Run!" With tremendous effort, Sarah lowered the camera and crawled backward into the tent. "Torres," she whispered urgently. "Torres, wake up." He sat up immediately. Years of field training, making him alert in seconds. "What is it?" "It's here. It's watching us from the tree line." Torres grabbed his own flashlight and camera. Chen woke up, then Yuri. They all crowded near the tent entrance. "Where?" Torres asked. Sarah pointed with a trembling hand. "There, at the edge of the trees, tall figure, just standing." But when she looked again, it was gone. The tree line was empty, just shadows and snow, and the wind moving through bare branches. "I saw it," Sarah insisted. "I took photographs." It was there. Yuri was studying her face in the flashlight glow. "Your pupils are dilated. Your hands shake. You are sweating, even in this cold. These are the signs. It showed itself to you. Why? Chen asked. Why her specifically? Perhaps because she is leader? Perhaps because it is curious about Americans? Perhaps because it chooses randomly, and we look for patterns where none exist? It does not matter why. What matters is that it is here, and it knows we are here. And now we must decide what to do. Torres was already checking his camera gear. We document it. That's why we came. If Sarah got photos, we need to develop them. See what the camera captured. And then? Chen asked. No one had an answer for that. They spent the rest of the night huddled in the tent, all four of them awake, despite exhaustion. Every sound outside made them freeze. Every shift of the wind made them grip their flashlights tighter. The rational part of Sarah's mind kept insisting this was just fear of the unknown, that there was a logical explanation, that they were trained professionals who had faced danger before. But that rational part was getting quieter, being drowned out by the animal part that knew with absolute certainty that they were in the presence of a predator. Not a predator that wanted to eat them. Something worse. A predator that fed on the fear itself. Dawn came slowly, like it was reluctant to approach this place. When there was finally enough light to see by, they emerged from the tent into a world that looked exactly the same as it had yesterday. Snow, trees, mountains, empty and cold and indifferent. But it felt different now, contaminated, like they had crossed some invisible boundary and couldn't cross back. We developed the film, Torres said, his voice rough from a sleepless night. I brought a portable darkroom setup. We can process one roll right here. It took him an hour to set up the equipment in the tent, blocking out all light and preparing the chemicals. Sarah watched, her mind replaying those moments over and over. The figure at the tree line. That blank face turning toward her, the pressure in her head. The overwhelming urge to run. Finally, Torres had the negatives developed. He held them up to his flashlight, examining each frame. Here, he said quietly, frame 12 through 17. You got it. Sarah looked at the negatives. In the tiny, reversed images, she could make out the trees, the snow, and there, in the middle distance, a dark shape. Tall and wrong and definitely not human. We need to make prints, Torres said. See it properly. The printing process took another hour. When the first image emerged in the developer tray, all four of them leaned close to see it. The photograph showed exactly what Sarah had seen through the viewfinder. A tall figure, humanoid but wrong. The proportions were off in ways that hurt to look at. The arms too long. The legs jointed in places where human legs didn't joint. And the head. The head was the worst part. It was smooth and featureless. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a blank, oval surface that somehow conveyed more intelligence and awareness than any human face could. And it was looking directly at the camera. Directly at Sarah. Chen made a small sound in the back of his throat. That's not possible. That's not a real thing. And yet, here is photograph, Yuri said, Diane. Here is proof. Same as 30 years ago. Same as always. It exists whether we believe in it or not. Torres printed all 6 exposures. In each one, The figure was in a slightly different position. In the last photo, it appeared closer. Not by much, maybe 10 or 15 yards, but definitely closer. It moved while you were shooting, Torres said. Between frames. It was approaching. Sarah felt cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. Why didn't I see it move? I was watching it the whole time. Perhaps you did not want to see it move, Yuri suggested. Perhaps your mind protected you by not showing you what your eyes saw. This happens sometimes with trauma. The brain lies to protect itself. So what do we do now? Chen asked. We have proof it exists. We have photographic evidence. Mission accomplished, right? We can go home and report our findings. But even as he said it, Sarah knew it wasn't that simple. Because looking at those photographs, she felt it again. That pressure in her head. That spike of fear. The image alone was enough to trigger the response. And if looking at a photograph could do this, what would happen if they looked at the entity directly? Not through a viewfinder, not from 200 yards away, but up close, face to face with that blank, terrible surface that was somehow looking at them without eyes. We need to understand it, Sarah heard herself say. That's why we're really here. Not just to document it, but to understand what it is, how it kills, why it kills, and maybe how to stop it. Stop it! Yuri laughed, a harsh sound without humor. You cannot stop it. It has been here longer than humans have walked these mountains. It will be here long after we are gone. You can only hope to survive it. And the best way to survive is to leave. Now, today, before it decides to come closer. But Torres was shaking his head. We need more data. We need to observe it under controlled conditions. Should I see how it behaves, its movement patterns. If we leave now, we're just repeating what the Soviets did in 1959. Running away, without answers. The Soviets ran away because they valued their lives, Yuri said. You should do the same. Sarah looked at the photographs spread out on the tent floor. That blank face staring at her from frozen images. She thought about the Dyatlov group. 9 people who had seen this thing and run in terror. 9 people who had died because their bodies couldn't handle the fear. But they hadn't known what they were dealing with. They hadn't been prepared. They hadn't understood that the fear itself was the weapon. Maybe that was the key. Maybe if they understood the mechanism, they could defend against it. Maybe knowledge was armor against the terror. Or maybe that was just her brain rationalizing a suicidal decision. We stay, Sarah said. One more night. We set up proper observation protocols. We take turns watching, so no one is exposed for too long. We document everything. And if it approaches again, if anyone starts showing signs of the acute stress response, we abort and get out immediately. She looked at each of them in turn. But we didn't come all this way just to run at the first sign of danger. We came to find answers. And I think we're close to something important. Something that could explain not just Dyatlov, but maybe other unexplained deaths, other encounters with things that should not exist. You sound like you are trying to convince yourself, Yuri observed. Maybe I am. But are you in or out? Yuri was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small flask. He took a long drink and passed it to Torres. I am old man. I have seen too much to be afraid of dying. But I am afraid of dying without purpose. So yes, I am in. One more night, one more chance to understand the thing that has haunted my dreams for 30 years. Then we leave, whether we have answers or not. Torres took a drink from the flask and nodded. Chen did the same. When the flask came to Sarah, the vodka burned going down, but warmed her from the inside. One more night, she agreed. They didn't know it then, but that decision would change everything. Because that night, the entity wouldn't just watch from a distance. It would come close enough to touch. Close enough to see what it really was. Close enough to understand why the human brain couldn't survive seeing it. Close enough to learn that some things are blank not because they have no face, but because they have too many faces. All the faces of everyone who has ever died in fear. All compressed into one impossible surface that the human visual cortex couldn't process without breaking. But that revelation was still hours away. For now, they had a day to prepare, a day to set up their observation protocols and their cameras and their emergency evacuation plans. A day to convince themselves they were brave and professional and capable of handling whatever came. A day to be wrong. They spent the day setting up cameras and sensors around the campsite. Torres positioned 3 Zorky cameras at different angles, each loaded with fresh film. Chen rigged motion detectors using repurposed radiation equipment. Yuri watched with a sad expression, like a teacher watching students prepare for an exam they cannot pass. You think technology will help, he said. Very American. Very logical. Also very wrong. Sarah was checking medical supplies. What would you do differently? Leave. The Mansi people call this Kolat. Syakhl, Mountain of the Dead. They avoid it. This is wisdom. The Dyatlov group avoided it too, according to their route plan, Torres said. But they ended up here anyway. Yuri nodded. Zena's last diary entry said they saw something beautiful on the ridge and wanted to get closer. Beautiful. That was her word. Sarah felt her skin crawl. It lured them. Or shows different things to different people. But always, it draws those who are meant to see it. Those who are ready to die. By sunset, everything was ready. 4-person rotation. 90-minute shifts. The person on watch stayed outside, but within 20 feet of the tent entrance. No wandering, no investigating sounds. Just observe, document, and alert the team. Torres took first watch. Sarah tried to sleep but couldn't. She lay in her sleeping bag thinking about those photographs. That blank face. The way her body had reacted to just looking at an image. At 9:45 p.m., Torres woke Chen for the shift change. Nothing so far. Dead quiet out there. Almost too quiet. Chen bundled up and crawled outside. Sarah heard the tent zipper close, then Chen's footsteps crunching in the snow as he moved to the observation position. She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, someone was shaking her shoulder. It was Yuri, his face pale in the flashlight glow. Chen is not responding. He has been outside for 2 hours. It is past time to wake Torres. Sarah's heart jumped. She grabbed Bandimar's coat and flashlight, crawling to the tent entrance with Torres right behind her. When she unzipped the flap, cold air rushed in along with something else. A feeling that wrongness amplified tenfold. Chen was standing about 15 feet away, his back to the tent, perfectly still, not moving at all. "Chen?" Sarah called. No response. She stepped out into the snow, Torres and Yuri following. As they got closer, Sarah could see that Chen's head was tilted back slightly, looking up at something. His arms hung loose at his sides. His flashlight lay in the snow at his feet, still on. "Chen, can you hear me?" Torres grabbed his shoulder and shook him. Chen's body was rigid, locked in place. His eyes were open, but unfocused, and his face wore an expression Sarah had never seen on a living person. Pure, absolute terror frozen in place like a death mask. "He's catatonic," Sarah said, checking his pulse. It was racing, maybe 160 beats per minute. His skin was ice cold and covered in sweat despite the temperature. "He's in shock. We need to get him inside now." They half-carried, half-dragged Chen back to the tent. His body was completely stiff, muscles locked. Sarah grabbed the emergency medical kit and found a syringe of diazepam. She injected it into his arm, hoping it would break the fear response before his heart gave out. "What did he see?" Torres asked. What the hell did he see? Yuri was staring out the tent entrance into the darkness. "Look at the cameras. Look at the direction they are pointing." The 3 cameras were all aimed at different angles around the campsite. But now, impossibly, all 3 were turned to face the same direction, pointing directly at the tent, at them. "Something moved them," Sarah whispered. While Chen was watching, something repositioned all 3 cameras. "Not something," Yuri said quietly. "It. The entity. It wanted us to know it was here. Wanted us to know it is in control." The diazepam was starting to work. Chen's muscles began to relax slightly, though his breathing was still rapid and shallow. His eyes moved, focusing on Sarah's face. When he tried to speak, only a strangled sound came out. "Don't try to talk," Sarah said. "You're safe now." "You're inside." But Chen shook his head violently. He grabbed her arm with a surprising strength and pulled her close. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Not safe. It's here. It's right outside. It's been here the whole time." "What did you see?" Torres asked. "Everything. I saw everything. All the faces." Chen's eyes were wide, pupils dilated. "It doesn't have one face. It has all of them. Everyone who ever died here. Everyone who ever died afraid. They're all pressed together into that surface. All those faces trying to get out, trying to scream. And it's looking for more faces. It's hungry for more fear." He started to hyperventilate. Sarah grabbed an oxygen mask from the medical kit and held it over his face. "Breathe slowly. In through your nose, out through your mouth. That's it." But Chen pulled the mask away. "We have to leave. Now. Right now. It showed me what it does. It showed me the Dyatlov group. I saw them running. I saw them cutting the tent. I saw them dying one by one. And the whole time, it was following them, feeding on their fear, making it worse and worse until their hearts exploded from the adrenaline. "How did it show you this?" Torres demanded. "It put it in my head, like a download, like it just opened a door in my brain and poured all that information in. And I know with absolute certainty that we're next, that it's chosen us just like it chose them." Yuri was nodding slowly. "This is what happened before. This is why the investigators were told to stop asking questions, because some of them saw it too, and that knowledge broke them." Sarah's mind was racing. Part of her wanted to grab their gear and run. But another part was piecing together what Chen had said. "It feeds on fear," she said slowly. "That's the key. It doesn't kill directly. It amplifies fear until the body destroys itself. Which means if we can control the fear response, maybe we can survive being near it." "How?" Torres asked. "How do you block a fear response to something that literally shows you how you're going to die?" Sarah thought about the photographs in Moscow, the way her body had reacted. But she had survived looking at those images. She had felt the fear, but hadn't been destroyed by it. What was different? Then she remembered. The St. Michael icon that Petrov had given her. She had been holding it when she looked at the photographs, had been gripping it so hard the metal edges cut into her palm. "I have an idea," she said. "It's going to sound crazy." "Crazier than a fear-eating entity?" Torres asked. Sarah reached into her coat and pulled out the icon. "Petrov gave me this. St. Michael the Archangel. It's just a piece of metal with paint on. But when I looked at the entity's photographs, I was holding this, and I survived." "You think a saint's icon is going to protect us?" Chen's voice was harsh with panic. "The icon isn't magic. It's a focus. Something to ground your mind when the fear tries to take over. The entity affects us through our own fear response. So if we can control that response, even partially, we might be able to look at it without dying." Yuri reached into his own coat and pulled out a small wooden cross. "My grandmother gave me this. I do not believe in God, but I believe in the power of belief itself." Torres looked at both of them like they had lost their minds. "This is insane. We should be calling for extraction." "We can't call for extraction until dawn," Sarah pointed out. "The helicopter won't fly at night. Which means we have 8 more hours here, whether we want them or not." She turned to Chen. "When it was in your head, did you sense anything about what it wants?" Chen was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was distant. "Hunger. It's always hungry, but not for food. For the moment when a human mind breaks. When fear becomes so intense that reality itself fractures. That's what it feeds on. So it needs us to be afraid," Sarah said. "Which means our fear is what gives it a power. And if we can face it without breaking, maybe it can't hurt us." "New plan," Sarah said. "We all go out together. Stay close. We wait for it to show itself again. When it does, we look at it. We document it. And we do not run. We hold our ground, and we observe it like scientists, because that's all it is. A phenomenon we don't understand yet. That is either the bravest thing I have ever heard, Yuri said, or the most foolish. They helped Chen to his feet. Sarah gave him the St. Michael icon. He held it like a drowning man holding a rope. Ready? Sarah asked. They weren't, but they nodded anyway. Sarah unzipped the tent and stepped out into the night. The others followed, forming a tight group with their backs together, flashlights sweeping the darkness. The mountain was silent. The wind had died completely. Stars blazed overhead. The moon cast long shadows across the snow. And there, at the edge of the tree line, the entity stood waiting. It was closer now, maybe 50 yards. Tall and still and wrong in ways that made Sarah's vision blur. That blank face turning slowly to regard them. Sarah felt the fear rising, felt her heart rate spike. But she gripped her flashlight and focused on breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth. She was still human, still rational, still in control. I see it, Torres whispered. We all see it, Yuri confirmed. The entity took a step forward, then another. It moved smoothly, gliding across the snow. Sarah raised her camera with shaking hands. Through the viewfinder, the entity looked somehow more real and more impossible. She pressed the shutter, advanced the film, took another shot. Torres was shooting too, his camera clicking steadily. Documented, turning horror into data. The entity stopped about 30 yards away. That featureless face tilted slightly, like it was studying them. And then Sarah felt it, a pressure in her mind. The entity was trying to get inside her head, trying to show her the faces, the fear, the inevitable death. She clutched the icon in her pocket, focused on the cold metal against her palm, used the physical sensation to anchor herself. This was just fear, just brain chemistry. She could acknowledge it without being controlled by it. The pressure grew stronger. Sarah gritted her teeth. She thought about her training, about breathing exercises and stress management. She thought about Torres beside her, Yuri behind her, Chen gripping her shoulder. She thought about the 9 people who had died here, afraid and alone. But she wasn't alone. No, she said out loud, speaking to the entity, to herself, to the fear. You don't get to do this. You don't get to break me. The entity took another step closer. Sarah stood at her ground. We're not running. We're not giving you what you want. We're staying right here until sunrise. And then we're leaving. And you can't stop us because we're not afraid of you anymore. It wasn't entirely true. Sarah was terrified. But she meant what she said about not being controlled by the fear, about choosing to stand despite it. The entity stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then it did something Sarah didn't expect. It turned away. Slowly, deliberately, it turned its back and began walking toward the tree line, not fleeing, more like losing interest, like they had failed some test. Within seconds, it had vanished into the darkness. Sarah's legs gave out. She sat down hard in the snow, shaking. Torres collapsed beside her. Yuri crossed himself. Chen was crying quietly, but still standing. Did we just survive it? Torres asked. I think so, Sarah said. I think we called its bluff. For now, Yuri added. It is gone for now, but it lives on this mountain. It will be here long after we leave. They spent the rest of the night in the tent, staying together. The entity didn't return. As dawn broke, Sarah stood outside and watched the sun paint the snow gold and pink. In the morning light, everything looked normal again. But she knew the truth now. Some places held things that shouldn't exist. Things that fed on fear and collected faces. The helicopter came at 8 a.m. Colonel Petrov was aboard. "You survived," he said simply. "We did," Sarah confirmed. "Did you learn anything?" Sarah thought about the photographs, about the revelation that the entity fed on fear, about human will being armor against the impossible. "Yes," she said. "We learned something important." "Will you share it?" Sarah looked back at Dyatlov Pass one last time, the tent still standing where 9 people had died 30 years ago. "Some things can't be fought with weapons," she said, "and they can't be understood with science, but they can be survived with courage. That's what we learned." Petrov nodded slowly. "Perhaps that is enough. Come, let us go home." As the helicopter lifted off, Sarah knew she would never forget what she had seen. But she also knew she had faced something impossible and survived, and that was worth all the nightmares to come. The flight back to Moscow felt like traveling between 2 different worlds. Below them, the Ural mountains gradually gave way to forests, and then to the sprawling industrial landscape of Western Russia. But in Sarah's mind, part of her was still standing on that frozen slope, staring at something that shouldn't exist. Chen hadn't spoken since they boarded the helicopter. He sat with his eyes closed, clutching the St. Michael icon like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. Torres kept checking and rechecking the cameras, making sure the film was secure, as if he needed physical proof that what they had experienced was real. Yuri stared out the window with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read. Relief, maybe, or resignation. The look of a man who had carried a burden for 30 years and finally been vindicated, even though vindication brought no comfort. When they landed at the military airfield outside Moscow, 2 black cars were waiting. Colonel Petrov stood beside them, his coat collar turned up against the February wind. "Debriefing in 2 hours, he said as they climbed out of the helicopter. "You will have time to shower, eat, and rest. Then we talk about what you saw." Sarah wanted to sleep for a week, but she knew they wouldn't let her, not until they had extracted every detail, every observation, every photograph from what had happened on the mountain. The debriefing room was the same one where they had first seen the Dyatlov photographs. It felt like that had been months ago instead of just 4 days. Sarah, Torres, and Chen sat on one side of the long table. Petrov sat across from them with 2 other men Sarah didn't recognize. Recording equipment was set up in the corner. "Before we begin officially," Petrov said, "I need to know. Are you all mentally stable enough to give testimony? Agent Chen, you were exposed longer than the others. How do you feel?" Chen opened his eyes. They were bloodshot but clear. "I saw something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. But I'm functional. I can do my job." "Good. Then let us start from the beginning. Walk me through everything that happened after you arrived at the pass. For the next 3 hours, They recounted the events in detail. The setup, the watches, Chen's catatonic state, the repositioned cameras, the revelation about the entity feeding on fear, and finally, the confrontation where they had faced it and survived. The two unknown men took notes furiously, but never asked questions. Petrov listened with the intense focus of someone hearing confirmation of something he had always suspected but never proven. When they finished, he sat back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. "The photographs," he finally said. "Agent Torres, were you able to document the entity?" Torres opened his camera bag and carefully removed 3 rolls of film. "I shot 2 full rolls. Chen got another partial roll before he went into shock. I haven't developed them yet. Wanted to wait until we were in a controlled environment. Develop them now. We have a darkroom facility here. I want to see what you captured." Torres left with one of the unknown men. Sarah and Chen remained with Petrov. "You confronted it," Petrov said. "It wasn't a question. You looked directly at the entity and commanded it to leave, and it obeyed." "I don't think it obeyed," Sarah said carefully. "I think it lost interest. We weren't giving it what it wanted. The fear was there, but we weren't letting it consume us. So, it moved on to find easier prey. Or perhaps it was testing you," Petrov suggested, "seeing if you were strong enough." The Dyatlov group, they were experienced hikers, strong people, but they were not prepared for psychological warfare. You were. That made all the difference. Chen spoke for the first time since the debriefing began. "Colonel, what happens now? Do you close the area permanently? Put up fences? Warning signs?" "The area has been restricted since 1959, but people still go there. Tourists, researchers, thrill seekers. Some come back, some do not. We recover bodies every few years. Always the same pattern. Massive internal trauma. No external injuries. Death by fear." "You could tell them the truth," Sarah said. "Warn people about what's actually there." Petrov laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Tell them what?" "That there is an entity on the mountain that feeds on fear and kills by thought alone. Who would believe us? And those who did believe, some of them would go looking for it anyway. Humans are curious creatures. We seek out danger even when we know better." He was right. Sarah knew he was right. If the CIA published a report about a supernatural entity in the Ural Mountains, it would be dismissed as Cold War propaganda. And the people who did believe would be exactly the wrong people. The thrill seekers, the glory hunters, the ones who thought they were special enough to survive where others had failed. Torres returned carrying a folder of photographs. His expression was grim. "You're going to want to see these?" These, he said. He spread the photos across the table. There were 23 images in total. The first dozen showed the campsite, the equipment, the mountain landscape, normal expedition photography. Then came the photos of the entity. In the first clear image, it was at the tree line, exactly where Sarah had seen it, tall and impossible, that blank face turned toward the camera. The quality was remarkable, every detail captured in sharp focus. The next few photos showed it closer, moving across the snow with that gliding motion. In one frame, it was raising an arm, as if gesturing or reaching. But it was the final 3 photographs that made Sarah's breath catch. In these images, the entity was less than 10 feet from the camera, close enough to see details that shouldn't exist. The surface that appeared blank from a distance was actually covered in texture, fine lines and ridges that formed patterns. And the patterns were faces. Hundreds of them. Thousands. All compressed together into that impossible surface. Mouths open in silent screams, eyes wide with terror. The accumulated death masks of everyone who had ever died in fear. Chen made a small sound and looked away. Even Petrov, who had seen the original Dyatlov photographs countless times, seemed shaken. "This is what it truly is," one of the unknown men said in heavily accented English. "This is what we have suspected, but could never prove. It is not a creature. It is a collection, a gathering of death itself." "How is that possible?" Torres asked. "How does something like this exist?" "We have theories," the man continued. "There are places in the world where the barrier between life and death is thin. Places of great tragedy, great fear, great suffering. Perhaps the entity is a manifestation of that boundary, a personification of the moment of death itself. And like any predator, it seeks out the fear that sustains it." Sarah thought about what Chen had experienced, the knowledge that had been downloaded into his mind, the entity feeding on the moment when a human mind breaks. "Can it be destroyed?" she asked. Petrov and the 2 men exchanged glances. Finally, Petrov spoke. "We do not know. We have never tried. To destroy it, we would need to confront it directly. Send people to the pass specifically to engage with it. And everyone we send might die. The risk is too great." "So you just let it kill?" Chen's voice was harsh. "You know it's there, you know what it does, and you just let people wander into its territory and die. We restrict access. We warn people, but we cannot patrol every square mile of the Ural Mountains, and we cannot tell them the truth without causing panic or disbelief. So, yes, Agent Chen, we let it kill, because the alternative is worse." The room fell silent. Sarah stared at the photographs spread across the table. All those faces, all those people who had died afraid and alone and been absorbed into something that shouldn't exist. "What about our report?" she asked. "What do we tell Washington?" "You will tell them you investigated a historical incident and found no evidence of Soviet wrongdoing," Petrov said. "You will say the Dyatlov group died from a combination of avalanche risk and poor judgment. You will provide photos of the terrain and meteorological data supporting this conclusion. The truth will remain classified." "Cover up," Torres said flatly. "Pragmatism," Petrov corrected. "The world is not ready to know that such things exist. Perhaps it never will be. Your government will accept your report because it allows them to close the file and move on, and you 3 will carry the real truth for the rest of your lives." He stood and gathered the photographs, placing them carefully back in the folder. "You survived what 9 experienced hikers could not. You looked at death itself and refused to blink. That takes courage beyond measure. But it also means you are changed. You have seen something that cannot be unseen. You have knowledge that cannot be forgotten. This is the burden of those who witness the impossible. Sarah thought about Director Hayes's warning back at Langley, about how some questions don't have answers humans can survive knowing. She understood now what he had meant. "Will we be allowed to speak about this?" she asked. "Even to each other?" Officially, no. This conversation never happened. Dyatlov Pass is just another Cold War mystery. But unofficially, Petrov's expression softened slightly. You will need to talk about it. With each other, with therapists you trust, with whoever can help you process what you experienced. The trauma is real, even if the official record says otherwise. He walked to the door, then paused. "One more thing, the icon you carried. The one I gave you. Keep it. Not because it has power, but because belief has power. You survived by refusing to let fear control you. By anchoring your mind to something concrete. Whatever helps you do that in the future, use it. Because now that you have seen the entity, it has seen you. And some part of it will always be there, in your memories, in your dreams, waiting." After he left, the three Americans sat in silence. Finally, Torres spoke. "So we lie in our report. We pretend it was just an accident. We let the world go on thinking there's nothing to fear in the dark." "Is that worse than the truth?" Chen asked. "Can you imagine what would happen if people knew?" Mass panic, conspiracy theories, idiots with cameras flooding Dyatlov Pass trying to become famous. The entity would have an endless buffet. Sarah knew they were both right. The lie was necessary. But it still felt like a betrayal of those 9 hikers who had died in 1959, who had seen the truth and paid for it with their lives. "We survived," she said quietly. "We saw something impossible, and we survived. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all we can do. Survive and remember and warn people away when we can." They flew back to Washington 3 days later. Sarah filed her report exactly as Petrov had instructed. Avalanche danger. Poor judgment. Accidental death. The CIA accepted it without question and closed the file. But late at night, when she couldn't sleep, Sarah would take out the St. Michael icon and hold it in her hand. She would think about that blank face covered in screaming mouths and terrified eyes. She would think about standing in the snow and refusing to run. And she would wonder how many other places in the world held things like the entity. How many other deaths were attributed to natural causes when the truth was so much stranger and more terrible. 3 months after they returned, Sarah received a package with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping from a Russian publication. The headline read, "American Tourist Missing Near Dyatlov Pass." The article was brief. A hiker from California had ignored warning signs and traveled into the restricted area. A search team found his body 2 weeks later. Massive internal trauma. No external injuries. Death by natural causes. Sarah put the clipping in a drawer with the icon and the classified photographs she had secretly kept. Evidence of something the world wasn't ready to know. That night, she dreamed of snow and blank faces and the sound of fear itself. But when she woke, she was still alive, still breathing, still surviving. And in the end, that was all anyone could ask for. To see the impossible and live to remember it. To carry the burden of truth in a world built on comfortable lies. The frozen faces of Dyatlov Pass would remain frozen. The entity would continue to hunt. And somewhere in the Ural Mountains, on a slope called the Mountain of the Dead, something waited for the next curious soul to wander into its territory. But Sarah Brennan had looked at it and refused to die, and that small victory would have to be enough. December 2019, 30 years later. Sarah sat in her retirement home in Virginia, reading the news on her tablet. The Russian government had reopened the Dyatlov Pass investigation. New theories were being proposed: avalanche, military testing, paradoxical undressing from hypothermia. She smiled sadly, still avoiding the truth after all these years. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she hadn't seen in decades. She answered. Agent Brennan. Torres's voice was older but unmistakable. Did you see the news? I saw it. They're never going to figure it out, are they? No, Sarah said, and they're not. Because the truth isn't something you figure out. It's something you survive. Chen passed away last month. Heart attack in his sleep. He was only 64. Sarah closed her eyes. Too young, but maybe not young enough to escape what they had seen. Did he ever talk about it? After we got back? Once, years later. He said he still saw it sometimes. In crowds, in shadows. That blank face watching him. He said the entity never really left. That once it knew you, it was always there, waiting. Sarah thought about her own dreams, the ones that never quite went away. Maybe Chen was right. Maybe that's the real price of seeing it, not death. Just the knowledge that it's always there, that death is always watching. Do you regret it? Torres asked. Going to the pass? Looking at it? Sarah thought about 9 people who had died without understanding what killed them. About courage and fear and the thin line between survival and surrender. No, she said finally. I don't regret it. We saw something true, something real. Even if no one believes us, that matters. After Torres hung up, Sarah sat for a long time holding the St. Michael icon. The paint was worn completely away now, just bare metal, but she could still feel the pattern where it used to be. Outside her window, snow was beginning to fall. Soft and quiet and cold, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Just like the mountain where 9 people had died and 3 had survived. Just like the truth that could never be told. Just like the entity that waited still, patient and eternal, in the frozen darkness of Dyatlov Pass. Hey everyone. Before we dive into this story, I just want to say thank you for being here. This channel exists because of you. Your comments, your shares, and your support mean everything to me. If this story gives you chills, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what you think. Seriously, your engagement helps more than you know. Now, let's get into one of the most terrifying classified operations the CIA ever conducted. The fluorescent lights hummed in the basement conference room at Langley. Agent Sarah Brennan shifted in her uncomfortable metal chair, watching the projector warm up. It was February 14th, 1989, and while most Americans were thinking about Valentine's Day, She was about to receive a briefing that would change everything she thought she knew about fear itself. Director William Hayes stood at the front of the room, his weathered face illuminated by the pale glow of the projector. He was old-school CIA, the kind of man who had lived through the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Sarah had never seen him look nervous before, but today his hand trembled slightly as he reached for the first slide. "What I'm about to show you is classified above top secret," Hayes began, his voice steady despite whatever was bothering him. "This stays in this room. You don't talk about it with your colleagues, your families, or even each other outside of operational necessity. Understood?" Sarah nodded along with the two other agents in the room. To her left sat Michael Torres, a field operative with 15 years of experience in hostile territory. To her right was David Chen, their Russian translator and cultural liaison. Both men looked as confused as she felt. Hayes clicked the remote. The first image appeared on the screen. It showed 9 young faces smiling at the camera. They wore heavy winter clothing and looked excited, the way people do at the beginning of an adventure. January 1959. These 9 Soviet citizens, all experienced hikers and skiers, set out on an expedition to reach Otorten Mountain in the northern Ural Mountains. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student. Smart kid, responsible. The kind of person who checked his equipment 3 times before a trip. Hayes clicked again. The next image showed a snow-covered mountain pass, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. They never came back. When a search party finally located them 3 weeks later, what they found defied explanation. The tent had been cut open from the inside. All 9 had fled into negative 30-degree weather, wearing nothing but underwear and torn clothing. Some were found barefoot in the snow. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She had read about unexplained deaths before, had even investigated a few during her time with the agency. But something about the way Hayes was presenting this felt different, more personal, more urgent. The bodies were scattered across the mountainside. Some had massive internal injuries, crushed ribs, fractured skulls, but no external wounds. The medical examiner said the force required would be equivalent to a car crash. One woman was missing her tongue and eyes. Several bodies showed traces of radiation on their clothing. Torres leaned forward. "Sir, with all due respect, this sounds like a Soviet internal matter. Why are we briefing on a 30-year-old hiking accident?" Hayes fixed him with a hard stare. "Because it wasn't an accident, Agent Torres. And because 3 days ago, General Secretary Gorbachev's office reached out through back channels. Glasnost isn't just about transparency in government. They want to come clean about something they've been hiding since 1959, something that scared them so badly, they've kept it buried through 6 different Soviet premiers." The next slide showed a document covered in Cyrillic text. Even without reading Russian, Sarah could see the multiple stamps marked Sekretno, secret. This is from the original KGB investigation file. The official cause of death was listed as compelling natural force. That's it. No details. No explanation. Just those 3 words, repeated in every report. But there's more. Hayes clicked through several more documents, each one heavily redacted, even in the Russian originals. The area around Dyatlov Pass was closed to civilians for 3 years after the incident. The lead investigator was forced to close the case after 1 month, despite having no real answers. He was told to stop asking questions. Everyone involved in the search was ordered to never speak about what they saw. And here's where it gets interesting. Another click. This time, the image showed what looked like a photograph of a photograph. The quality was poor, grainy, but Sarah could make out a landscape of snow and trees. This was recovered from one of the victim's cameras. The film was developed by Soviet authorities and immediately classified. There are 5 more photographs like this one. Different angles, different distances, but all showing the same general area. The Soviets won't tell us what's in these photos. They'll only say that the Dyatlov group saw something that caused what they're calling acute neurological trauma, resulting in fatal fear response. Sarah spoke for the first time. Fatal fear response? Sir, people don't just die from being scared. That's exactly what I said when I first read the file, Hayes replied. But according to the Soviet medical reports, that's precisely what happened. Whatever these 9 people saw triggered such an extreme physiological reaction that their bodies essentially shut down. Massive adrenaline surge, cardiac arrest, internal hemorrhaging from blood pressure spikes. The human body tearing itself apart from the inside because the brain couldn't process what the eyes were seeing. Chen cleared his throat. Director, what exactly is Operation Bluebird? Hayes turned off the projector. The room fell into a dimmer light that somehow felt more oppressive than the images they'd been viewing. Operation Bluebird is our chance to find out what the Soviets have been hiding. The political situation is changing. Gorbachev needs Western support, needs to show good faith. So they're giving us access. Limited access, supervised access, but access nonetheless. You 3 will travel to Moscow, review the complete Dyatlov files, interview the surviving investigators if possible, and then travel to the pass itself. They're letting us go to the actual site. Torres sounded skeptical. They're insisting on it. That's what worries me. The KGB liaison, a Colonel Viktor Petrov, specifically requested that we send a team to the pass. He said, and I quote, "Americans are good at not believing in things. Maybe you will see it and not be affected." Sarah felt her skin prickle. Not be affected by what? That's what you're going to find out. Your cover story is that you're academic researchers studying Cold War-era incidents for a historical database. Petrov knows that's bullshit, but it gives everyone plausible deniability. You'll have diplomatic immunity, but understand this. If something goes wrong out there, we can't extract you quickly. The nearest town is Ivdel, population 8,000, mostly Gulag descendants and miners. The pass itself is accessible only by helicopter or a 2-day ski trek. Hayes walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. I've been doing this job for 32 years. I've seen a lot of things that don't make sense, but I've never seen the Soviets admit they're scared of something. Whatever is out there, whatever those hikers saw, it's real enough that the KGB would rather have us investigate it than send their own people back. Think about that. He left without another word. The 3 agents sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Torres spoke. Anyone else think this sounds like the setup? To a horror movie? Sarah wanted to laugh, but couldn't quite manage it. Instead, she gathered her files and stood. Wheels up in 48 hours. I suggest we spend that time learning everything we can about Dyatlov Pass. Something tells me we're not going to like what we find. 2 days later, Sarah found herself on a military transport plane crossing over the Atlantic. The Cold War might have been thawing, but you wouldn't know it from the reception they received in Moscow. A black ZIL limousine met them at the airport, the kind reserved for high-ranking party officials. Their driver never spoke, never made eye contact, just navigated the gray February streets with mechanical precision. The KGB headquarters on Lubyanka Square looked exactly like every spy thriller had portrayed it. A massive yellow building that radiated bureaucratic menace. Sarah had studied Russian history in college, knew that thousands of people had been interrogated, tortured, and executed in the basement of this very building during Stalin's purges. Walking through its doors felt like stepping into the mouth of something that had been hungry for a very long time. Colonel Viktor Petrov met them in a conference room on the 3rd floor. He was a broad-shouldered man with steel gray hair and the kind of face that had forgotten how to smile decades ago. His English was nearly perfect, touched with just a hint of a British accent. Agent Brennan, Agent Torres, Agent Chen, welcome to Moscow. He didn't offer to shake hands. I am Colonel Petrov. I will be your liaison during your investigation. Everything you see, everything you learn, goes through me first. This is not negotiable.